Hi, I'm Laura Sarchet, and I'm the Inclusive Higher Education GA at the University of Rochester. And today I'm here to talk to you about person-first language. So before we talk about person-first language, let's discuss the context. So who might be in your classes at the University of Rochester? We have students in our tour program, which stands for Transition Opportunities at the University of Rochester. And these are students from BOCES who are auditing classes in our College of Arts and Sciences typically. And they are students with intellectual or developmental disabilities, and they come to class with a tutor or coach who is trained in helping make adaptations to the materials and helping them access the class along with your help as the instructor. So you may have tour students in your classes. You may also have students who are registered with the Office of Disability Resource. And these are students who have a documented disability and who often need accommodations in their classes and across campus. You also have neurodiverse and neurotypical students in your class who need to access the curriculum equitably, just like all the other students. So a neurodiverse student is someone who has a difference in the way that their brain operates. It's another way of saying a little more inclusively that someone has a disability. And a neurotypical student is a student without a disability. So let's talk about our learning goal for the day. So the goal is at the end of this session that you will develop a better understanding of person-first language and how to use it, and identify one action step in your own practice. So what is person-first language? Well, if we think about just the name person-first, it's when we're speaking, writing, we are putting the person before their disability. So I have a couple of examples for what might be considered person-first language in the affirmative phrases column versus some outdated language that would be disability-first language in the negative phrases column. So for example, instead of saying the blind or the blind student, we would say the student who is blind or the person who is visually impaired or a person who has a visual impairment. Instead of saying that someone is afflicted by or a victim of their disability, we would say a person who has a disability or a person who has a particular disability, such as multiple sclerosis or cerebral palsy or epilepsy. We want to avoid language that positions the person's disability as their defining characteristic. For example, we don't want to use language such as a person who's confined to a wheelchair or a wheelchair-bound person. We could say a person who uses a wheelchair. This also applies to people who have mental health disabilities or mental illnesses. So instead of saying that someone is crazy or nuts, or even an addict, you would say that someone who has a psychiatric disability, someone who has a mental health illness, someone who is in recovery from a substance abuse disorder. We also want to think about when we're trying to convey something, not even about people with disabilities, but about people without disabilities too. The way that we talk about individuals can still affect the disability community. So for example, instead of saying that a person is normal or healthy, we would say that that person is neurotypical or that person does not have disabilities or a person without disabilities. Same thing when we're talking about people who have disabilities accessing the world. We want to say that they're successful, they're productive, they are participating. We're not going to talk about people who have overcome their disability. That kind of positions that their disability is a terribly negative thing that is to be overcome. And oftentimes people with disabilities will view their disability as a large part of themselves. It kind of makes them who they are. So it's not something that they can leave at the door per se. So we want to be aware of our language in that aspect as well. So in general, we refer to the person first and their disability second. We want to avoid using phrases that make the person the same thing as their disability or define the person by their disability or imply a negative connotation of disability. So using the words crippled or someone who suffers from their disability, puts a negative connotation on disability. There are some exceptions to person first language. So, for example, some people in the autism community or the deaf community identify with identity first language. For example, I'm autistic and I prefer to use the phrase autistic rather than a person with autism, because I believe that autism is so much integrated in my personality and who I am and how my brain works, that it's not something I want to separate. It's the same thing as if I were to say, I identify as a woman, I identify as autistic, I identify as a student. So that's one exception. And this does not apply to all people with autism or all people who are deaf. So it's always important to kind of defer to person first language, and then you can always ask respectfully what the person's individual preference is, whether they prefer person first language or identity first language. And we talk about all of this with the knowledge that as we learn to be more inclusive as a society, terminology will change and adapt. So that's something that we're always open to as well. So let's recap a little bit. The most important thing is that it's all about the individual. So person first, and it's about that individual's preference. And we want to think about them as a person, not as their label. So we want to avoid any language that conveys a negative picture, that patronizes or perpetuates misconceptions about disability. We want to choose language that's consistent with the idea that lack of access is really the problem. Lack of access to the environment is the problem, not the person's differences. So when in doubt, respectfully ask what a person's preference is, or if you're not sure if you're using person first language appropriately, go ahead and ask a person with a disability or a person who is familiar with person first language to kind of check you a little bit and see if you're using that language appropriately. And always ask the individual what their preference is as far as person first or identity first language if you're not sure. So I'd like you to think about one action step you can take in your practice. Can you analyze the way you think about and discuss disability? Does it really put the individual first, or are you always thinking about the disability first? Ask a colleague to kind of audit your work in accessibility. Check out our resources on our YouTube channel, or reach out to me for more professional development opportunities. As always, you are the experts. So if you have other ideas of how you can take action steps towards being more inclusive, please feel free to share. I would love to hear what you're doing in your classrooms and across campus. You can reach me at ihega@rochester.edu through email, or you can go to our tour or Office of Disability Resources website to look for more resources. Thank you so much and have a great day.